some things that work to women's disadvantage systemically. So you show up prepared, you show up confident, you show up competent in what you're doing. And simply the observation of people around you doesn't appreciate this as much and doesn't like the woman showing up this way.
Who is most interested in having these conversations?
Sometimes it's the female leader who also wants to know how to show up authentically in her female leadership style. Sometimes it's the CPO or head of product that has low engagement scores in the team.
But what triggers people towards action? Usually it's more a better future scenario, right? It's like it's going to be greener, it's going to be rainbowy, it's going to be unicorns, rather than if I don't do this, it's going to be hell.
I'll give you some carrots.
Yes, carrots, please.
So, carrots. Business carrot number 1, better outcomes. Business carrot number 2, more innovation in your team. Team happiness carrot number 3, right? Like is a more engaged, it is a happier team. You could look into the research about the connection between happier teams and outcomes as well.
Hello, welcome to the Productized podcast. This is the podcast where we explore the minds of the most innovative entrepreneurs and leaders in product management and design. So today, we have a special guest who is breaking new ground in how we understand the gender's role in advancing product careers. Please welcome Simonetta Batteiger. She's the founder and CEO of Inclusive Leaders, an expert in inclusive leadership and a seasoned product professional with a wealth of experience in international business development and strategic partnerships. Simonetta, thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Andre, and hello to everyone who's listening. It's a joy to be here today.
Yes, great. We finally get the chance to talk a little bit about this pressing topic, which has been close to our heart for many years. If people have been following the podcast since the beginning, they know that we actually started as the Girls Who Product podcast, and eventually that season span over 3 years. But we never really formalized this in the sense of having someone with your profile that would be able to give us a more structured view in what is really going on. So we were very much anti-pattern, anti-product, just following our intuition, not being very data-driven. And now Simonetta will definitely give us a more data-driven approach because that's her field of research. But before we dive into those questions, let me start with our trademark, hopefully funny questions. What's your favorite app right now?
My favorite app right now is Spotify. I love listening to all kinds of podcasts, not just product ones. I'm a curious person, so this is a wealth of knowledge from all around the world, all kinds of domains. So I love that.
Yeah. Yes. Spotify, strangely enough, has not been in podcast for so long, but it feels that they have been able to really put a dent on the podcast market. So what's your favorite way to relax after a busy day? And I think the key word here is after, cannot be before or during.
I actually love to hang out with friends after work and ideally over nice dinner. I like good food, so getting 6 or 8 people together, sit around a table and just have a good time, enjoy good food and good conversations. That's like a very nice thing to do at the end of a workday. Takes your mind off things.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, hanging out with friends. Yesterday, I tried to do that, but my friends, they were all busy or watching Netflix. So I don't know what they were doing. But yeah, I ended up going to a music festival here called Colorama. Really nice place, really nice festival. There's still, yeah, I think today is the second day. The lineup was really incredible. And if you are doing events, as you get into the professional, you really start to enjoy also how other organizers do stuff. So for me, it was also very interesting from that perspective. Okay, yeah. So let's dive into our questions. For those that don't know you so well, Simonetta, your research has spanned topics, but specifically it hasn't covered some compelling insights into how gender influences career advancement in specifically in product management, which is the topic here. So to kick things off, let's go into the current state of this gender dynamics and what your studies have revealed. Can you give us an overview of your research findings regarding gender dynamics within product management roles?
Right. So maybe I'll start with why I started looking into this. And the reason why is I am female, right? I have had a career in tech and in product for many, many years. And when I got started with this, like 16, 17 years ago, there were not that many women in those kind of roles. I was living in the US, maybe there were more women in tech and more women in product than here in Europe, but still you were kind of the exception and not the rule. And along the way, I faced difficulties and challenges that I didn't observe my male peers would have, but I'm a sample of one. So I was like, okay, is this just about me? Am I particularly sensitive to certain things, or what is going on here? And as I kept going through my career and thinking about how to build great teams, kept coming up against this topic of like high performing teams have psychological safety. What does this even mean? And so there, I came across that there is a connection between how people feel like they have a sense of belonging and how people are treated at eye level and equally, and how people feel safe in a space. And so that's kind of, it's just all like we're bits and pieces of the puzzle of why I started to look at this topic. And then I remember a specific moment at Mobile World Congress a few years ago where big tech organization invited female leaders into the room for a brunch. And a young woman got up and raised her hand, and she's like, does anyone here, and on stage sit like C-level women, women of big tech organizations, does anyone in this room, either on stage or in the audience, have a answer for me how to face the competence-likability dilemma? And not a single hand went up. And I was like, how is this possible? We have 200 women here. Not a single one of us has an answer for how to be with this in a good way. And I was like, this has to change. I have to figure out what's going on here. I have to figure out what makes the puzzle pieces of it being more joyful and more fair to be a woman in tech. And then I started to look at this thing. I was like, how is it different for women to be in product versus for men to be in product? How do we get promoted differently? What's really going on? And so I just applied product thinking to the problem, and I went and I talked female product leaders who successfully got promoted and male product leaders who successfully got promoted to start listening for their stories and start to see if I could see patterns, if there are differences in the kinds of stories that people tell me about this point in time where they do get promoted. And lo and behold, you find a wealth of stories. Some relate to this competence likability dilemma, right? Where you as a competent woman in a leadership role are not perceived to be as likable as your male peers. You can look up the research on this. It's published by MIT and Harvard Business Review if you're into looking into this. You found the stories of how men got promoted on potential and women have to prove themselves 110% oftentimes that they have the right skills to be eligible for that next promotion. And sometimes they face the moving yardstick. They do everything they've been told they have to do to get that promotion. And then they come back and they ask for it. And then their manager says, yeah, but now you also have to show this. And it's just like, it keeps changing. That's a pattern I've heard from women and men when I talk to them. And so I was just like, okay, this is still not fair. But there must be things that people can do to make it more likely that you do get that promotion. So my aim with the research findings that I've published on my blog as well, and that I'm looking to deepen with a more quantitative study that still collects responses. So if you are in product and you would like to contribute to the research, I'm sure we can put a link to the type form into the show notes of this conversation. I'm particularly looking for male voices on the subject. They don't seem to be as enthusiastic to participate, maybe because they don't have the problem. Yeah, so I found that things that do work if you do want to get promoted, and that actually applies to both women and men. are things around you have to have a good relationship with the decision maker on your promotion. So investing into that relationship with your manager and their direct manager is a really good thing to do. Looking for the right kind of context works specifically for women. That means doing your research. Does this organization already have women in powerful leadership roles? Yes or no? Because that's a sign in action. Are they promoting women? Yes or no, right? Like if you see them in senior roles, if you see a C-level representation of women, if you see VP level representation of women, then that means they have done this before. They have promoted women before. If there's a cast of all men, it doesn't mean that there is no chance to get the promotion, but is maybe not as likely. And then there's this topic of visibility. The person who takes the promotion decision on your behalf should know who you are and should like the way you think and act. And a good way to be visible with something relevant is not necessarily with your looks and a pretty face, right? That's what a lot of women oftentimes bring, right? But it is be visible with a strategic contribution towards your organization. The good thing is strategy for most people is a little bit emotionally intimidating. It's hard work. You need to really like make space for it. You need to learn how to do it. Most people aren't like a strategist by design. Just you step into your product role and you're a great strategist already.
Mm-hmm.
But investing a little bit of time in this and starting to be able to think strategically and starting to ask good strategic questions of your senior management, maybe challenging their thinking with something, maybe contributing something that you found from your discovery insights that relates to strategy. Those are all good ways to become more visible and be seen as a strategic thinker and a strategic contributor in your organization. And that makes it more likely that you will be considered to be part of a strategy conversation with senior leadership, that to be considered to be given a strategic project to run and or contribute to. So those would be like my top three things, like invest in the relationships, make sure the context is right, and get good at the visibility / strategy game in your organization.
All right. So one, invest in relationships. What is the second?
Make sure that the context is right, that
Context.
you are in an organization that does promote women, that does have things like a good layout of what the job description is for an individual contributor and the leadership role and a more senior leader and all these kind of things, so that the moving yardstick game is not as likely. And the third one is the visibility. Make sure you're being visible for good strategic contributions in the context of your organization, that you contribute towards the impact you want, towards the revenue gains, towards the user growth game, or whatever your strategic objectives are in your organization.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this was such a rich answer. Let me try to digest it and into a number of blocks. So we spent a conversation from there. But just a quick parenthesis is a side note to the fact that in the last few years, at least that's what I've seen reading, even in mainstream media like Financial Times and stuff like that. You don't need to dig into TechCrunch or YC or whatever it is. The whole bros, the Silicon Valley bros, right? And the Silicon Valley bro culture, it's very much about this first point that you were just talking about, relationships, right? And in a professional context are, at least in my personal experience, and I haven't done it right many times, are so much under rated, because at the end of the day, working is a social, yes, you have to work to pay rent, but it is a social, it is a social context, right? It is, you like to work with people that you like to work with. You don't, it's, you tend to work with people, if you have the possibility, that you like to work with, that you like to hang out as well, that you like to, talk, even if that conversation is just by the water cooler. But it's so important, this relationship component, that I don't know if you agree with this, or if you have seen this in your research, that for many years, I think the conversation around gender imbalance has been very much focused on this third aspect, which is visibility and meritocracy, which has been, you know, women are as competent as men, or it has been a very dry conversation of KPIs and metrics and whatnot, forgetting that, you know, that might be true. But if the decision maker doesn't like you, right? If they don't, if they don't feel that you kind of person that they could invite to a baseball or soccer game, or, hang out for beers, whatever it is, they would not they would not necessarily want to have you either promoted or on their teams or whatever, or more strategic important projects. Is this a revelation, or has this been supported by other research that you also found in literature or elsewhere?
I mean, I haven't done specific research on just this, but this
Hmm.
pattern was literally the first one I noticed.
In the
From both
conversations.
sides, by the way, also from the men, right? They
Yes,
also do not
absolutely.
get promoted if they don't get along with the decision maker on this promotion decision, right? So it's not it's not actually surprising at all. And if you think about how to be successful in product in general, everything you do is with people. You work with people in your team. All your stakeholders are human beings. Your customers are human beings. The interviews you have are with those human beings, right? The person in the compliance and legal team is a human being. So it's like everything you do has to do with people and relationships. And I think that's actually good news for women, because women are quite good at creating a personal relationship with others around them. So it's just like maybe this additional layer of being intentional about it, and also cutting your losses when you realize that the manager you report to and theirs are not at all aligned with your values, or
Hmm.
are not at all your cup of tea, right?
Hmm.
The chance that they will suggest you for a promotion is just slim,
But
right?
that, but
Just
that is.
recognize this and find ways to either move under a different manager if your organization is big enough, or maybe jump jobs, can be a very good element in this puzzle of building your career, right? So the finding is nobody, neither the women nor the men, get promoted if their manager who decides on the promotion doesn't have their back, doesn't like them on some level. There are things anyone can do to make it more likely that another person likes you, right? And you could look into the psychology toolkit of NLP and of just finding out who is this person that I'm speaking with, what are their hobbies, what are they interested in. Usually there is a spot of common ground with almost anybody, even somebody who seems on the surface to be very different from you, either because they're different gender, different color of skin, different nationality, or whatever. But you might share an interest in the same kind of music. You might share an interest in, oh, you both love to be aunties or uncles, right? You might play the same sport, or there's so many different ways how you can have something in common. And at work, you also have the joint success of the company in common. So anything you can do to have your manager reach their goals contributes towards the larger business's objectives. And there's a natural alignment there that, like, building on this and being useful to this person is a great relationship builder, right? If you keep on challenging your boss, don't be surprised if they're not so happy with the relationship layer, right? Like, doesn't mean don't challenge your boss, but like kind of balance it. Also help your boss, right? Also find some common ground on something that you can joke around with. So there's just be intentional about how you design that relationship and how you show up as a human with this other human.
Hmm. 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 Yes, yes. So what kind of specific challenges do you see women encountering when trying to advance in their product management careers?
I mean, as I mentioned, the moving yardstick thing is one, right? Another one,
So moving yard here being.
moving yardstick means, okay, so I am here, I'm talking to my boss about I would like to advance in my career. Currently,
Hmm.
I'm a product manager. I'd like to be a senior product manager, or maybe a people leader, right? A group product manager, or whatever your next level is, right? and they say to you, oh, we like what you're doing here, but in order to reach that next level, you also have to show more strategic aptitude and, I don't know, two more things, right? And you go away from this meeting like a busy bee, doing your homework, showing your contribution at a strategic level, showing whatever the other two things
Mm.
were. You come back into the conversation and you're like, look, I've shown now this. Can I have my promotion, please? And then they're like, oh, yeah, you have done this now, but what we are still not covering is this, and that. And then the new list opens up, right? That's what I mean with a moving
Right.
yardstick. So the
Got
target
it.
to reach that goal is it keeps being changed on you.
Right. So this moving targets, but why do you think that happens? Why do you think managers, you know, people are, let's just assume, not sadistic for no reason, right? Usually, although
Right.
there's a few exceptions there. But, you know, people tend to be motivated by a specific aspect. So why do you think managers would have this almost sadistic behavior of, oh, moving target, no, not in there anymore. Now we have to do this. And yeah, it remembers that story from, I think it's the semi-god in Greece, right? He was always trying to go up the mountain, but he was never reaching the mountain. So why do you think this happens?
Why do I think this happens? It's a really good question. I don't think, and I'm with you, I don't think most managers do this intentionally. But what they also kind of find in their context is they now have a choice to promote either this man or this woman into the next level role. And maybe they don't have the opportunity to promote them both, right? So they have to pick between two candidates for promotion. And there are some things that work to women's disadvantage systemically. One is the thing that I mentioned before, the competence-likability dilemma, right? So you show up prepared, you show up confident, you show up competent in what you're doing. And simply the observation of people around you doesn't appreciate this as much and doesn't like the woman showing up this way. And it voices itself in comments like, oh, she's a boss bitch. She's too loud. She's too aggressive. She is too this, too that, right? Somehow socially unacceptable behavior for doing the exact same things that this guy is doing on the other end. And that's because traits like being assertive, for example, that are seen as good leadership trait in men are seen as breaking role expectations in women who perceive to be more pleasant around us if they're more nurturing, if they're a little bit subordinate, if they're asking for your help a little bit more, if they don't take the lead as much, if they're more warm with you. Like there's all these extra expectation of how women show up at work. And if you're showing up straight and focused and assertive and good at what you're doing, people simply don't like you as much. And that applies to everybody around you, including the women, sadly, right? Like we are
Mhm.
just like, if you show up as a leader, male style, you're simply not liked. And that I think does play a role. That's research that's done like not specifically to product, but I think it applies to any kind of leadership role. That's what I mentioned earlier with the Harvard Business School and MIT research
Mhm.
where they did look at this. They literally presented a case study to their students with the exact same content. And in one, the guy was called Michael, and the other one, she was called Martina. I have the names on right? But the research was done this way. And then they asked their students, how do you like these two managers? And they said, oh, this guy is a competent leader. He's assertive. We like him. And oh no, we don't like her. She's like too loud. She's too aggressive. She's too bitchy. So that kind of a thing is just in the way we've been socialized as humans and the way patriarchy and the way we treat women interact. And it's hard to get out of this. It's a unconscious bias to unlearn. And unless leadership does the work on this, unless there are maybe women around them at the same level that have these kind of conversations with them to open their eyes to this, it plays a role.
So what kind of strategies do you think specifically women in this situation could apply? Because sometimes the context is arguably, I think, the hardest part of the equation to change, because
Right.
it's just a big context out there. This is the world we live, and some societies might be more. I just traveled from Sweden yesterday, and definitely, it's a more equalitarian, at least on the surface, kind of society. But it's a big world out there. So what kind of strategies, very tactical stuff, would you recommend people in this situation could do, given this context that we know it is what it is, to do not be perceived as, as you said, bitchy or difficult, or I don't know, whatever it's preventing them from reaching the top?
Talk about it. Honestly, like awareness is step one. Once you know that this exists, you can start watching yourself and those around you, whether or not you think this might play a role in how you perceive some of the women around you, for example. But that's also why I said tactically, as a woman looking for a job, right? Look for the kind of organization where women have already broken the ranks, are
Broken the
already in
ceiling.
VP
Yeah.
level positions, are already in C-level positions, because the culture in this organization most likely is one where it isn't impossible to have a career as a female in this organization. There is some research from the UK that says like about 30% women in the culture make a break point where things kind of like become way more equal. So that's like maybe a rough number to watch for when you browse a company and you look at their team page, like how many women do you see on the page and how many women do you see in the product organization, right? Because sometimes the women are in the sales teams and in the marketing teams, but not in the tech part of the organization. So just like watch this kind of stuff and then speak about it with your manager as well. Like make this a topic in a one-on-one and say to them, oh, hey, I've read this article. What do you think about this? To just kind of pique their curiosity, not to point your finger and judge
Right.
them for not knowing, right?
I
But
think you are sexist.
engage in a conversation. It's like, you know what? Like in my last job, I experienced this. I hope it doesn't show up here as well. How can we kind of design around this? And so there's so many ways, but really like
I
dare
would
to
be
have the
triggered by that
conversation.
question.
Yeah.
I would be, if I was being asked that last time I experienced this. Am I going to experience this? I would be a little bit triggered, to be honest.
Mm.
But let me just go back to the first thing you said, which is, so let's assume people are doing is still in the research phase, right? Looking for a job. What kind of things should they be looking for? What kind of red flags or white flags should they be looking for on either the job interview, or what kind of things can they do? Is it about going to the website or asking how many people do you have in your C-level or boardroom, sorry. There's, 2 or 3 things actions people can do in this job research phase.
You have an interview. In the interview, ask questions around things that point at behavior, right? You can ask, does your company keep data on how women and men get promoted in the organization?
Mm.
If they don't even think about this,
Mm-hmm.
right, it means probably there's a low level of awareness on the topic, right? You could ask, has there ever been a training on diversity, equity, inclusion topics in your organization? Is this something the leadership team values? Right. And again, you can just listen for the reaction and the response. If they seem totally surprised and taken aback, probably they're not thinking about this, right?
Yeah.
And as I said repeatedly, like do your research, just look how many women in senior leadership roles in this organization, because that's like the action step these people got promoted. That means it's possible. And you don't even have to ask about this. Is right
Mm-hmm.
there visible on the website.
Mm-hmm. Is
Or
it?
there is a lack of this information and it also tells you something.
Yeah. And what about, the job interview being done exclusively by men, or I would say men would be harder. Is this something you would find has a red flag in the process? Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. I mean, this could just be who they put in there. I mean, it'd be nice if they had a bit of diversity in their recruitment pool as well. But, I think it's more important to know the team you end up working with and what their markup is and how their leadership level looks than who your recruiter is. I don't know. I wouldn't say don't consider organizations where the people interviewing you are men. That I don't think is good advice.
Right. So team.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I think we have like a bunch of things that are very actionable that people can do, specifically women, in this research phase. All right. So have you seen some of these challenges evolving over recent years? Do you see any notable trends or improvements that you have observed? I mean, I know this has been close to your heart for a few years now. How do you see the evolution of the landscape?
It's moving in the right direction, and we're not there yet. That's the quick summary of
Hmm.
it. So, what I see as moving in the right direction is, for example, there's a lot more awareness on the topic, right? There are people like you, right? You are clearly male, inviting women into podcasts, and you've done this for a long time to speak about their perspective in this kind of a role and just create a platform to even have the conversation, right? There's more language around this now that we all have and know. Doesn't mean that it directly translates in changed behavior. But if you want to change behavior, step one is to become aware of what you want to change. Step two is to kind of strategize, like, how does this look in action? And then, like, you do and you reevaluate and you give feedback and you keep changing, right? So I think there's a lot more organizations now that have basic data on the markup of their employee population and how it distributes between men and women and at what levels. And it's not just about gender, by the way, right? It is about all kinds of aspects of identity. It's about the color of your skin, your religious beliefs, your sexual orientation, whether or not you come from a different country, whether or not you come from a working class background, whether you have all your abilities, or maybe you have a disability like you're blind or deaf, or I don't know, some other invisible disability, even maybe you're neurodiverse, right? All these topics, I think they all relate. They all have to do with equal access to opportunities. And this conversation about this has advanced a lot. Also, I think because companies like Google looked at psychological safety as a hallmark of high performing teams. And then when you look a little bit deeper, what does this actually mean? It also means nobody in the team is discriminating against me based on my identity, right? So, like, there's so many little levers at work that make the conversation happen and that move things in the right direction. But the final measurement of it actually is equal. And when we now look back at the term on the topic of gender, right, that would mean equally many CPOs female as CPOs male, equally many VPs level in product female versus male. And if you run these numbers, like, there's room for further improvement.
Are you afraid that the current economic crisis, which is still being felt, and I guess will still be with it for a few months, as who knows, is going to retrocess this process, in the sense that when you have, you know, a thriving job market, companies really go the extra mile to be more inclusive, get more talent. They really have to run faster and longer now that they have a wider pool of talent available. Are you afraid this will also mean a retrocess in this process?
I don't have data on it.
Hmm.
I think yes, but I could also be wrong, right? And I think there's also good reason. And I think a lot of leaders understand how diversity contributes to good outcomes and good bottom line, right? So it would be a little bit self-sabotaging to know this and not keep an eye on it as part of how you're right sizing your organizations, right? Are they keeping this into account? I don't know. I don't been part of the selection committee of a major downsizing in some organization to see whether they pay attention to this or not. But as you said initially in our pre-conversation, crisis creates opportunity as well. And so I also see amazing women getting together and starting organizations on their own I mean, that's a little bit how I got started with setting up my business, right? I wasn't let go as part of a big wave of letting people go, but we kind of reached a point in the employment engagement where it just made sense for both of us to go split ways. And then I was like, okay, maybe now is the time to start something on my own. And I look around myself and I see lots and lots of women doing this. And so if you're setting culture from the get-go, you can set a different culture from the very beginning. So I'm not entirely pessimistic on this. I think it's great.
Absolutely. But I really like the tone that you put on the answer about right sizing, but keeping an eye on what you're doing, right? Because sometimes right sizing might be an excuse to let those unconscious bias also work towards right sizing, which, might not be the ideal scenario. Let's just dive a little bit into your own career. And now you are the founder and CEO at Inclusive Leaders. Are you working actively with HR teams and companies in helping them creating more inclusive leadership? And how does it play out from your own experience?
Yeah. So there's two services I offer. One is like one-on-one coaching with leaders who want to have me as their coach, and I guess if they reach out to me with this brand, inclusive leadership, it speaks to them on some level, right? So as I'm bringing my coaching persona to whoever this leader is, it's going to be coming through this perspective and lens that inclusivity and diversity in the team is a good thing to have. And the other part is leadership trainings with organizations. And they're sometimes for product teams specifically, but sometimes also just for leadership in general, right? I'm also an executive coach. I am a trained coach. I'm not just a product leader who calls themselves coach. I've done whole coaching training as well. My leadership programs are designed around this, right? For me, and it says so on my website as well, right? Diversity and inclusion are strategic enablers for teams. You look at the research that McKinsey has published earlier this year, right? Diverse leadership teams create 62% better outcomes than teams that are just white men, to put it that blunt, right? So there's good reason, also good business reason to invest into diversity and inclusion as parts of creating great outcomes, creating really good business outcomes as well at the end of the day. So yeah, I mean, my leadership programs look at this as an element that maybe some other leadership programs don't teach. Obviously, I'm also looking at strategy. Obviously, I'm also looking at having difficult conversations. Obviously, I'm looking at how do you have a performance review conversation? How do you have good one-on-ones and all these kinds of things? But part of this is to understand that you as a leader might also perceive someone who's very different from you as a little bit more difficult. So how can you be with this? How can you as a leader role model this inclusiveness and make the floor for your team to be more psychologically safe, to be more inclusive, to be more capable to have these kind of conversations where if you want to look at innovation, right, like different perspectives and a good conversation, a good abrasive debate that doesn't get personal, but is like on the topic, is what you want to have. You want to have different perspectives looking at something. So
Mhm.
obviously that kind of stuff flows into my leadership trainings as again, awareness creation, and then also as tool set of how to be with this tension that also comes out of diversity in the team, right? Because I don't want to sugarcoat this, right? The more diverse your team, the more opportunities for disagreement in the team because the people come at work from different perspectives, from different life experience, from different culture, where one or the other thing is interpreted way differently. And so if the team isn't capable to have these kind of open conversations and trusting conversations, then you lose the asset of diversity in the team. So that's what I work on with leaders and teams.
Who is your entry point in the company? Who is most interested in having these conversations? Is it male leaders that are struggling to create more inclusive organizations, or is it women that want to progress in their career, so they find you as a coach to do that? Who's the entry point, or is it HR, right? for all reasons could be also working on this?
It differs. Sometimes it's the female leader who also wants to know how to show up authentically in her female leadership style to be effective as a female leader. Sometimes it's the CPO or head of product that has low engagement scores in the team and is looking to try to get to the bottom of this, because obviously it's concerning when you have in your HRIS like data proof that mood in the team isn't all that great. Sometimes it is HR leaders that are looking to just add me to their coaching pool. So it's a little bit all of these. And sometimes it's maybe someone comes to me after listening to this podcast and it's like, oh, I'd like to work with her because I liked what she said about this and that in this episode. So it's not just one thing.
Yeah, I've I've found that I think it's kind of obvious, but what triggers people towards action, usually it's more a better future scenario, right? It's like it's going to be greener, it's going to be rainbowy, it's going to be unicorns, rather than if I don't do this, it's going to be hell, it's going to be nightmarish. The leash doesn't work as effectively as the carrots. So speaking about the carrot a little bit, what do you think are the carrots in this ideal scenario? And then we can speak whatever it's ideal. I guess ideal will again, it's also a moving target. But and is there any company or any good examples that are public out there that you can point us towards? These companies are actually doing something very right. I think this is very inspirational. You should definitely look what is happening there, because the net happiness of employees in these companies, it's higher for both males and females, and anyone in between. And yeah, this is, I don't know if you're getting where I'm trying to get here, but
I'll give you some carrots.
yes, carrots, please.
So carrots. Business carrot number 1, better outcomes. Business carrot number 2, more innovation in your team. Team happiness carrot number 3, right? Like is a more engaged, it is a happier team. You could look into the research about the connection between happier teams and outcomes as well. The number 1 predictor of happiness at work is a sense of belonging in the team. So it's like whichever way you slice this problem, if you want to have great outcomes, which I think every business wants, right? Nobody wants to be a leader of a team that underperforms. If you actually want a good performing, a high performing team, like you cannot disregard this topic. It'd just be ludicrous. You might be blind to it. You might have a blind spot here that you don't see the connection between psychological safety, inclusive leadership, and great outcomes. But then, we're doing a little bit of awareness work in this podcast. I'm writing a whole blog on the topic. There's lots and lots of literature out there where you can educate yourself on the carrots of this. And honestly, from my own experience creating these kind of cultures in my teams and seeing the kind of results my teams have produced across industries, across company size, where I've been envied and sometimes met with jealousy of other leaders around me that were looking to replicate what my teams were doing, and they just couldn't comprehend how this team is working differently, even when I told them so, right? It's like the carrot is at the end, you reach great outcomes, you reach great results. And which leader doesn't want that? Like female or male, doesn't matter. Like you don't show up to work to fail, you show up to work to win, right? We are living in a context right now with so much change happening around us, right? We have the whole wave of AI hitting us all, right? We have a lot more political instability in the world with what's happening in Ukraine and Israel and other wars around the world. We have technological developments also in the health science space. And if you listen to Amy Webb and her predictions at South by Southwest earlier this year, like all these waves together, they're just like shaking us all up, creating a highly uncertain business context. She says she hasn't seen that much uncertainty in the market in 20 years. So when you have that much uncertainty around you, what grounds you? Like, how can you function as a team And you look back at the research, you look at how to operate well in a complex environment, right? Like it's a lot of experimentation, it's a lot of diverse idea creation, it's a lot of listening and talking to each other. Everything we do in product is based on including different perspectives, right? If you don't look at it from a gender lens, but just from the lens of we have in a product trio, classically, we have a PM, we have an engineering lead, we have a UX lead, right? There's not,
Yeah.
it's not the PM on top of them. We're like a collaborative exercise, right? We cannot do anything without legal's help, sales help, funding from somebody, meeting a good client problem. A lot of what we do in product is all about aligning different perspectives towards a good outcome, right?
Mm.
So, I mean, just like think this through to the very end and don't shut down the voices of some of the people in your team because you cannot figure out how to give the women the same voice in the room or how to include the more junior team member in ideation or how to not judge the black person's perspective in some way. Like if you figure this out, you have a much higher chance of success in an uncertain context. And this is where we all live today. Nobody has the answers for how AI is going to impact our business in 5 years from now. It's like everything is changing and shifting right now. So the more diversity in thinking you have in the team, the better you are equipped to navigate this and come out successful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That to me is the carrot. It's like it to me is common sense to apply. This is not a nice to have exercise you do on top to hit some ESG thing on your report. I mean, you
Right.
also hit that with this, but you're doing it because you create better outcomes and you secure the strategic future of your organization. To
Mm-hmm.
me, it seems ludicrous not to look at this.
Okay. Two questions here. So one has a little bit to do with the fact that you have lived and worked in the US and now in Germany. How do you see this two different work cultures? And of course, I mean, obviously generalizing because you had a very specific East Coast experience, and I guess in Germany it is what it is wherever you are. But is it different? Do you see the same patterns, or is not really something that is a cultural thing? It's more a component of the corporation itself and the company that we're talking than anything else.
I guess a mindset to disrupt and ask for permission later is more likely to be found in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
A mindset to take risks and fail and not see this as personal failure as much, also as an entrepreneur, is more likely to be found in the US than in Germany, for example, right? Where there's a lot of shame around failing as a business owner. But the mega trends, right? This debate on feature factory versus empowered product teams. It literally comes out of Marty Kagan's mouth, out of like witnessing mostly US companies. It's like they have this problem too. Of course, we also have this in Germany or in Europe, right? This inclusive and diversity topic and psychological safety topic that we've been discussing a lot here, it's there as well as here. Maybe they're even more focused on the topic of race than in Germany, where race, because just of the markup of our population, isn't as top of mind for as many people. And I'm not saying it's not there, right? Like, I mean, look at our history. We definitely have issues with that as well, right? And it takes different shape in Germany. But the topic of like systemic things standing in the way of truly inclusive and high performing teams is a global phenomenon. It's there as well as here. I think there's a lot of thinking about product work coming from the United States that then just gets adopted in Europe, sometimes without being questioned. I think we could put our spin on some things where we have a way of thinking about.
What kind of things would you? That's a very interesting perspective, right?
Yeah, so I mean, take this topic of diversity, right? And you look at Europe, right? And the US kind of points their finger in looking at Europe and saying, oh, they don't speak a common language, oh, they have all these different cultures and they
Mm-hmm.
cannot agree on one common thing. Yes, that's true. And this diversity of perspectives sometimes takes longer to come to a decision, but actually comes to a better decision in the end.
Yeah, I
Not
think
always, right?
that
It's not
happened
perfect
a few
here or
times.
there.
but in many ways, I agree with you. We're not really leveraging our diversity sometimes for that kind of intentionality or outcome driven culture of yes, because out of this huge diversity we have in Europe culturally wise, it feels that we're we're just sometimes wasting so much energy and not really getting anywhere sometimes. But anyways, getting back to the cultural aspect of it, I totally agree with you. I mean, us has obviously been perceived as more permission later entrepreneurial, and I guess that transposes to gender as well, regardless if it's men or women. What about specific companies? Do you have any good examples top of mind that you have been following or tracking in your work that you would say, oh, these guys are doing, or these girls are doing this right?
I mean, it's always hard to say from outside, right?
Yes.
Because you
Yes.
don't really know what the culture is like truly inside the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Organizations that I have followed and I've liked,
Mm-hmm.
right, include, for example, the Wikimedia Foundation and Catherine Maher and her leadership there.
Wikimedia.
Yeah, but again, I mean, I have not been close enough to the entire team to really say, and things change as well over time, right? But I would point people to if they are curious about a specific employer. I mean, there are platforms like Kununu and Glassdoor where you can look at what people who are exiting an organization are writing. Now, there's always like a filter of bitterness there, right? So it might skew to look at it with a grain of salt. But those are signs that point at a healthier or less healthy culture in an organization. So that's where I would go. So I can't tell you now the perfect example of they're doing everything right is, I mean, maybe Brené Brown's organization, right? She's been like applying this kind of stuff to her own organization, doing the research on it over and over and over. Maybe that's a good example. But again, are they going to be perfect? Probably there's some stuff there too. So this is my experience. The perfect employer doesn't exist. But what you can do in your context is show up a certain way and you will have an influence. Don't be naive about it. The most influence in any kind of organization is usually exercised by the CEO. So look at how this person shows up.
Mm-hmm.
It tells you a lot about how they live their life and what kind of behaviors and culture they would like to see around them. So that's what I would watch.
Is there any female-led company that is particularly inspiring to you?
I'm in the Brené Brown organization and the Wikimedia Foundation,
The Wikimedia Foundation.
the two ones I mentioned.
Mhm.
I'd have to think more about this. So it's actually a really good question to come up with more examples of this to showcase organizations that are run really well.
Yeah, examples are so powerful. So, all right, well, let's maybe, well, yeah, the role of gender in product innovation, and that's maybe as we head on towards the last part of our conversation. Gender diversity is often discussed in terms of its impact on team dynamics, and that's part of what we have been talking here. But let's try to focus in specifically in products and driving product innovation, which is equally crucial and specifically in different products. So let's discuss how maybe diversity influences this innovation and what companies can do to harness its potential. So, based on your experience, how does gender diversity drive innovation in product teams? Because it's one of the carrots that you you talked about, right? What advantages does it bring specifically to this?
I want to make clear that diversity is larger than gender. It's an
Absolutely,
intersectional topic, right? I
absolutely.
mentioned this before. This is about color of skin, nationality, physical abilities, sexual orientation. Do you show up dressed with a headscarf or a turban like a Sikh? Are you being treated the same way as everyone
Hmm.
else around you? Is the person with the working class background being treated the same way? Diversity of experiences comes from all these angles. It is not
Right,
just gender.
absolutely.
And
Huge.
then, I mean, I also mentioned this term before, creative abrasion, right? It was coined by Linda Hill from the Harvard Business School, and she did research into innovation and what are the contributing factors to highly innovative teams, right? And she says this is the key ingredient into innovative teams, and she defines this as the capability with an innovative organization to embrace friction, debate, and conflicting viewpoints as catalysts for progress. It represents a marketplace of ideas where individuals actively listen to diverse perspectives while passionately advocating for their own opinions. Now, if you listen to this definition, it means different perspectives in the room. It means different lives experiences in the room, different age groups, different genders, different whatever is valuable to the product you're building. So I would look at through the lens, what is this product that I'm building? Am I building a product for everybody globally? Right? Then the example of where I worked, right? At Vistra, we built a platform for CFOs globally to run payroll compliance and financials globally. Could we have done this with only a US perspective on this? Absolutely not. We would be blind to the labor laws in Singapore and the compliance landscape in Germany. And so we had lots of partners, lots of perspectives informing how to think about this problem to be audit ready and compliant in 50 nations around the world. So it's just like in the nature of the product, we needed to understand different countries, different user viewpoints, like the person running payroll, the person in charge of the whole payroll globally that is looking at different kind of stuff. So there's always different perspectives and angles needed in building good products. And to give the negative example, maybe like where diversity in product is missing, that's where we clearly see the gap. Just recently, you can research this and find it all. There's a period tracking app made in the UK, one of their unicorns, right? They recently launched a feature for men to track their partner's cycle, and they put language in there. These days are good for spicy dates. You look at the reactions of their main user group, the women on the web, and they're like, oh my God, in some cases, I might consent to this, but what if I'm coerced to share this with an abusive partner? What a horrible feature to release like this. And this company does not have women in VP or CPO or senior leadership role, right? It mind boggles me that you make a product for women to track their cycles and you don't have women in leadership, and then you release stuff like this. And you obviously totally miss the mark and lose the trust of your users as a result.
Out of all places, that would be a company to have women, right?
You would think, right?
I would think so. Yeah, I'm surprised. I'm genuinely surprised. So, okay, yeah, negative examples are also good, right? Because they give us the anti patterns that we don't necessarily or should try to get out of. Okay, so yeah, I think that was a really strong example, and one of the things that we might want to wrap up is around, so we've talked about evolution, so let's talk a little bit about perspective, which is whatever is going to happen in the next few years. What excites you most about your work with inclusive leaders? I mean, you gave this positive note saying, things kind of are going towards the right direction, but we still have a long journey ahead of us, or we still have a work to do. So what excites you? What keeps you, waking up in the morning and say, yes, this is what I want to do in my life. I'm very much excited of helping move this agenda forward. And how do you think this will evolve in the next few years?
I mean, what excites me about this is my vision for the world is one where we don't have to have this conversation, right? Where it doesn't matter what gender you are to be given opportunities, right? It doesn't matter the color of your skin to be given opportunities. And I think we're on our path towards this, right? It's rocky, it's a little bit up and down, sometimes a step back and two steps forward, but it's generally moving in the right direction. And I am super excited about this because the context in which we live, this highly uncertain context of so many things shaking and moving, right? It just favors teams that can live diversity well and then can create good outcomes. So I think this market environment we're in is like a little bit of a shake up in our system, and more diverse teams will move out of this stronger. So I am just optimistic about this, and I'm excited about it because I think it creates better outcomes and is also the right thing to do. And I want to see a world where if I enter the workforce, I'm not being met with some of this stuff that I have seen in my career. So I'm excited about putting a dent in that and creating progress in that direction.
Hmm.
Couldn't think of a better thing to work on for myself. I love what I'm doing because of this. I think it's, for me, it's a fulfilling thing to work on. Plus, it's a successful one.
Don't you think that in many ways this is also one of those Sisyphus stories, right? It's going to be there because there's no, like you said, there's no perfect employer. There's also no perfect end state to this. And we have seen, also the side effect of some of this policy, specifically, I'm talking about education, which is a little bit different, but now you have very strong research pointing to the fact that, for instance, boys in school have lower gradings. They're not being, as successful as maybe before. And I'm not even discussing why is that. I think that's up to the grabs. There's different reasons and causalities to that. The evidence is quite clear. For instance, here in Portugal, lots of professions now are female dominated. And when I say female dominated, so totally female dominated. For instance, judges in Portugal, chances are 70-80% are women. And that also creates a unconscious bias towards lots of situations. So let's say family rights, etc. There will be a unconscious bias there. So, and what I'm trying to say is that this agenda is not so much gender A, gender B. It's about equality towards the future, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think, I mean, there's a whole other debate, the whole thing about quotas for women, right? But I think France does something smart there. They have a quota for getting more women into government roles, for example,
Mm-hmm.
but they also are very clear on the quota goes both ways, right? The moment you actually face the situation where you would have 70% women, right, they would start hiring more men again, right, to keep a balance.
Mm.
So I think this, to just keep in mind, like, what is the markup of your society? That kind of representation you also want in your team, right? And or if you're acting globally, some representation from all the markets in which you are offering your product is probably a good idea, right? So yeah, I mean, obviously too much of one thing is kind of having a shadow side, right? I also think having the conversation is challenging the status quo. So there's always going to be a little bit of tension, a little bit of backlash,
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay, right? We're looking to change something. We're looking to shake something up to create a different kind of future. So there's a little bit of that tension is actually a good thing. And I just keep being optimistic on this. Like, I have yet to meet a woman who's like out there saying, "Oh, I'm here on a mission to like eradicate men from planet Earth, and I want only women in leadership." And no, I mean, all we're asking for, and that's the definition of feminism, is like a 50% equal share of things. So I don't know. I think this concern is a nothing burger to me.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And in many ways, we are lucky to live in Europe in 2024. It's kind of historical hindsight is always a difficult thing to have, and um, how lucky we are, right? I mean, um, parts of the world are definitely not there yet, and also from a historical perspective, I mean, things have obviously evolved. Definitely, the situation nowadays is all over Europe. I'm not even saying Germany or Portugal or France or whatever it is. Very different from our grandparents and even maybe parents. Just a final maybe note. I mean, you are based in Cologne, right?
Mhm.
There was this. There's this recent book about female, and this is a topic that has been popping up in recent years, maybe out of curiosity or intellectual academic circles, how women in Eastern Germany were in many ways empowered to an extent that was rare to the time vis-a-vis other countries. So
Yes.
how do you see that in German culture nowadays? Is this something that is still is the shadow of the past that doesn't really echo nowadays, or do you still see remnants of that? Of
It's an it depends answer. I think sadly, with the reunification in Germany, there was this perception that everything the West does is better than everything the East does, right? And
Mhm.
so kind of like everything just got rid of, and we tried to put what worked in West Germany on top of East Germany. And we also got rid of some things that we should not have thrown out, right? So you rightly point at some of the ways in which women had much better support around themselves and were just considered to be equal material for the labor market, right? So, and I remember even in my earliest days, my first job, while I'm still putting myself through my business studies here in Germany, I worked at an organization. I had a colleague from Eastern Germany, and she was telling me some things about what she had as support as a woman
Mhm.
working there, where all the women around us in that West German office were like, oh my God, it'd be amazing to have this, right? Like there was just no question around
Well,
accessible childcare. There was no question around you would go back to work and earn your pension points. Actually, East German women who are now retiring are making much better pensions than their West German counterparts because they
mm,
didn't stay at home as moms. They had support with care
right.
for their kids. They had things like you would get days off in the month, extra days off on top of what the men got for care work. Now you might look at this and be like, okay, should be equal, right? Like everyone should take care of household stuff. But the system allowed for the fact that like women did more of this, so they gave them 12 extra vacation days. Yeah, I mean, so many things, right? So there's just like a different, equal way of looking at each other. And yeah, so I mean, I think these women who have lived through this influence our society as well, right? And I wish some of the policies that led to these outcomes would have applied for the rest of us here, would have not been a bad thing.
So there's also a chance of retrocess. Historical retrocesses are possible. I mean, obviously, we all see what's going on in Afghanistan right now after 20 years of Western forces being there. The Taliban's got power and seized power, and now they're basically traveling back to the Middle Ages, or I guess even worse than that in some cases. I think the writing on the wall is that we need to keep vigilant in many ways, right?
Yes. But I look at this as like, I've looked at Zen Buddhism a little bit.
Mm.
And in Zen Buddhism, you look at the emotions and the emotional states you have, and you could like be more angry by being more angry more often, or more joyful by being more joyful more often. I think you have to be intentional about how you want to show up in the world, what kind of vision for the world you have, put your actions in line with that vision. And I mean, look at Harry Potter, right? Like it's the classic tale of good versus bad in a way, right? Like, and you have a choice. Which house are you joining? Like, how are you acting in the world? Who do you elect? How do you support one or the other, right? Like if we support each other as people who want to see one version of the world advance, this version of the world will advance. If we stay silent, do nothing for it, then if someone else advances a different agenda, like the Taliban in Afghanistan, right, or like the far right in Germany, and there's no other voice standing against this, taking other kind of actions, then this is what influences the debate. And this has always been the case throughout our history as humans on planet Earth. So we are all at choice. I know where I stand. I know the choice I want to make. I trust you make similar choices, right? We're many. We just have to support each other.
Okay, I think this is a very strong way to end. Agency, the power of agency, individual agency, is so important, right? Because the context might be there, but we as individuals, we have this power of agency, like you said. which house are you joining? Think about it. I think this is a great way to wrap this conversation. Simonetta, before we actually wrap up, let's do just this fast this or that game. Are you up for that?
Yes.
Okay.
Being an inclusive person and a this or that game is a little bit funny, but sure, let's go.
Let's go. Morning meetings or evening calls?
Morning meetings.
Digital tools or traditional methods?
I'm leaning towards digital tools. Not always.
Working remotely or at the office?
Again, leaning towards working remotely. I love the office though.
Books or podcasts?
Also both.
Any book or podcast? I mean, you are obviously a podcast avid listener. Any podcast you would recommend to our listeners?
Dare to Lead by Brené Brown, The Happiness Project. Forgot the name of the lady who runs it, but it's brilliant.
Okay, we'll put it in the notes.
And in product world, Lenny's podcast, your podcast as well, of course, but those are
Lenny's podcast. I'm also a huge
resources I really treasure. And in terms of books, there is one I really want to point out. It's called Being Wrong: Adventures in the Margin of Error by Catherine Schultz. And I love this book. It opened my eyes on how to be with things going wrong and why it makes us feel so bad and how to be with this in a better way. So that's a book recommendation.
So it's about dealing with when you get things wrong and just living with that.
It's about you made a mistake, like what happens next? Or you were wrong about something, what happens next?
Yeah,
or you failed with an experiment, what happens next, All
right, definitely we'll check that one out. Thank you so much for being with us. Has been true pleasure, and I learned so much. I really hope everyone will enjoy this conversation as well, as much as I did.
Has been my pleasure, Andre.